BMW has been around for over a century, and in that time, they made some freaking amazing cars. Fast ones, beautiful ones, legendary ones, but every now and then, they made a car that changed the game. Changed BMW, changed the car world, made them a shitload of money, and in some cases, made fans absolutely lose their freaking minds. Today, we're gonna take a look at 10 of those. So let's start with one that basically created the BMW formula, the O2. If it weren't for this car, BMW probably wouldn't exist today. And the sports sedan, as we know it, probably wouldn't either. Probably. Car and Driver called it one of modern civilization's all-time best ways to get somewhere sitting down. And I guess they were onto something, because you gotta know that before this car, this type of car, so a sedan looking thing that also kinda handled like a sports car, was not a thing. You had dedicated sports cars and normal cars, but no car that combined the two. Okay, that was a lie. There was Alfa Giulia, before that the Alfa 1900 and Giulietta, and there was also the Jaguar Mark II, but those are more like the inventions, and then BMW took that and popularized it. Think touchscreen phones and iPhone. Apple didn't invent a touchscreen phone, LG did, and before that IBM had one, but Apple made everyone want one.
I just take my finger and I scroll. That's it.
You see, before this era, BMW had no clear identity. In the 50s, they were selling luxury cars nobody wanted, Isettas with motorcycle engines. They almost got absorbed by Daimler-Benz. What saved them was this big restructuring of the company backed by the Quandt half-brothers. Two very rich guys whose family fortune came from, well, let's say, wartime activities. And a new lineup called the Neue Klasse launched in 1962. The O2 was the small two-door version of that, hence the name. Anyway, this was the first BMW that really felt like a BMW. Like, you sit in this thing and you're like, oh, that's like a really old E30. And an E30 is like a really old E46. And an E46 is like a really old G20, right? Before the Neue Klasse, BMWs didn't really feel like that, and after, you can definitely see the bloodline. Anyway, the O2 became super popular and it set the stage for the car that would replace it. The first 3 series. And the rest is history. The E90 335i, or E91, 92, 93, same thing. Specifically the early N54 engine cars. Now, why are these so important other than being notoriously unreliable? 2 reasons. The first one is because this was the first BMW since the 1973-2002 Turbo to feature a turbocharged petrol engine. Okay, there was one in the middle, the 745i. The point is, before the 335i, BMW was the naturally aspirated company. Silky smooth inline 6s, V8s, V12s, linear power, that was the BMW thing. Until the N54. A 3-liter twin-turbo inline-6, 306 horsepower, 400 Nm of torque, and that changed the whole character of BMW cars forever. They became more easy to drive, you didn't have to rev them out all the time anymore. Although, the funny thing is, because this was BMW adding turbos for the first time, since like ever, it's almost like they were ashamed of doing it. Because here's what they did. They added 2 small, low-pressure ones, and essentially what that does is minimizes the turbo lag and makes the power delivery more linear. In a sense, BMW tried to make it feel like an old, naturally aspirated engine. They even called it a 35i, named after a displacement they were trying to simulate. I think because they were afraid that existing customers might be appalled by the idea that now BMWs come with turbos. Ew. Anyway, I said that these engines are notoriously unreliable. And that's true. You know, when these cars were new, they had a bunch of recalls, lawsuits even, There were a lot of problems with stuff around the engine, high pressure fuel pumps, injectors, electric water pumps, turbo wastegates, stuff like that. But it's also slightly unfair to call the N54 itself unreliable, because the actual block and head are pretty freaking strong. You see, BMW overbuilt this thing as f***, and that's the second reason why this car is important, because it didn't take long for the tuning scene to find out how strong the engine was. Because now you had a regular 3 Series with an overbuilt twin-turbo straight 6, and with some basic mods and a tune, it could make supercar levels of power. There are hundreds, if not thousands, of examples making 500 to 600 horsepower on stock internals. And this is where modern BMW culture really begins. The whole downpipe and a tune thing. And whether you love that or hate that, this engine basically opened the door for everything that came after. The N55, the S55, the B58, the S58, and this is BMW's thing now. Turbo inline 6s. And it all really started here. Number 3. The E36 Compact. Yeah, I put Compact on the list, but hear me out. It's gonna blow your freaking mind. Launched in 1994, it was BMW's first hatchback since the 2000 Touring. It was designed to compete mainly with the Golf and other European and Japanese hatchbacks, and because the Compact was essentially a shortened 3 Series, that meant it was still rear-wheel drive, and it also came with 6 cylinders, which made it really weird in its class because almost nobody, and I think actually nobody, made a 6-cylinder rear-wheel drive hatchback at a time. If you know of any, please write it in the comments. So already the Compact is not your normal hatchback, right? And it didn't take long for BMW M to do something completely insane. An M3 Compact. Yeah, an M3 Compact. It had the 3.2-liter E36 M3 engine, M parts, and 4 exhaust tips. The first M car with 4 exhaust tips, by the way. And yes, there was only one prototype. They never sold it. But that prototype showed the idea. A smaller, cheaper, slightly wild performance BMW underneath the M3. And now you might already see where this is going, right? The M2. Yeah, the Compact is the reason the M2 exists. Now, how did we get here? Because after the E36 Compact, there was the E46 Compact. And after the E46 Compact, there was the E90 Compact. But with different marketing. They called it the 1 Series. And then came the 1 Series Coupe. And then they made the 1M. And after the 1M, BMW renamed the 1 Series Coupe to 2 Series. And voila! We got the M2. And that's why the Compact is important. Speaking of small M cars, we have to give it to the original small M car. The E30 M3. I know, this one was predictable. I tried to avoid it. I really did. Because this car has been glorified to death. But, to be frank, it's been glorified for a reason. It was the first M3, and the only M3 that was truly born as a homologation special. Which basically means it existed only because of racing. More specifically, Group A touring car racing. And the rule said, if you want to race this car, you first have to build at least 5,000 road-going versions of that car. So BMW didn't build a race car out of the M3 like they do now. They built an M3 because they needed a race car. Which may or may not sound obvious to some of you, but when you actually think about it, that's freaking cool. The only reason the M3 exists is because of racing. Like, this doesn't really happen anymore, you know what I mean? But it was pretty common back in the 80s, and a lot of cool cars came to be because of rules like this. But the crazy thing is, the M3 is pretty much the only name from that era that still exists. So, yeah. Anyway, the E30 M3 went racing and it became the most successful touring car in history. Which is just a really big flex for BMW. Under the hood, it had the legendary S14, a high-revving 4-cylinder engine based on the old M10. The same M10 that powered the O2 back in the 60s. Which is kind of weird, if you think about it. But this one was made by, literally, cutting the two combustion chambers from the head of the 6-cylinder M88, which BMW used in their M1, and then bolting it on to the M10 block. Racing versions developed 300 to 360 horsepower from just 2.3 and 2.5 liters, which is insane. Although the road versions had 192 to 238 horsepower, which is still impressive for the time, but that was also one of the reasons the E30 M3 didn't have this huge commercial success the later ones had, since the 325i had a smoother inline 6 with not that much less power, and for a lot of normal buyers, especially in the US, that made more sense than the M3, which is fair. Although they did sell around 18,000 of them for the entire world, which compared to the E28 M5 is like 7 to 8 times more, so I guess it was successful. But still nothing compared to the E36 M3, which they sold 70,000 of them. Anyway, we don't need to keep glazing the E30 M3. No disrespect to the others, it's just that, you know. Fuck! Now, let's go to the car number 5. The 5. The E28 M5. I think this car is kind of forgotten about. I'm not sure why. Probably because only 2,241 were ever built. It was the first M5 and the first M car ever built. Except for the M1 and the 3.0 CSL. But okay, the M5 was the first M car in modern sense, you know, that they take something from racing and then they put it in a normal sedan and call it an M. 3.5 liter inline 6 producing around 280 horsepower, double overhead cam, individual throttle bodies, all that good stuff. And in 1985, that was absurd. That thing was the fastest production sedan in the world when it came out. And believe it or not, it was the first high-performance sedan in the world. So, you know, like all the Mercedes AMGs, Cadillacs, Lexuses, Audi RSs, whatever, you know, this idea did not exist before the M5. Okay, that was not completely true. The Mercedes 300 SEL 6.3 from 1967 was probably the first one. 280 horsepower V8. That was also the fastest production sedan in the world when it came out. So I guess we have to give it to Mercedes on that one. But the funny thing is, there would be no M5 without the car that was actually the first M5. But it just wasn't called that yet. The E12 M535i, which launched 5 years before the E28. So I guess technically everything I just said for the E28 M5 also goes for the E12. However, that car was even rarer than the M5 and it was never sold in the US. Anyway, they're equally important. But again, the actual first M5, even before the M535i, is the 1976 530 MLE. It stands for Motorsport Limited Edition and it was made essentially because BMW South Africa wanted to go racing in the modified production series and they needed a car. So maybe we need to thank South Africa for the M5 because they kinda got the ball rolling. Car number 6. The original X5. Nowadays it almost seems like BMW only makes SUVs. They have an SUV version for literally every model. Well, this was the first BMW SUV ever. Actually, BMW called it an SAV, as in Sports Activity Vehicle, because of course they did. You know, they had to let us know from the start that this is a sports vehicle, which you then take to go about your activities. People hated it at first. You know, BMW was supposed to make sports sedans, low cars, not big old trucks. But BMW being BMW, they didn't build an old truck. It used an unibody chassis and not body on frame like most other SUVs at the time. And journalists described it that it drove like a car. Yes. I mean, that sounds obvious now, but it was actually quite rare back then. A very interesting way to see how BMW looked at it when developing it is this test mule. Essentially a lifted 5 Series. Although that's not what it actually is underneath, it kinda explains the whole car better than any press release. Fun fact, the whole design process only took 6 weeks, and it took the designer Frank Stephenson only 2 hours to sketch it on a flight. Same guy who did the F430 and the Mini, and to this day I still think it's the best looking X5. It just looks like a BMW SUV. Almost 500,000 sold by 2006, which is pretty good, especially for back then. Now, despite the name, the first X5 actually didn't come with xDrive. It was all-wheel drive, but not xDrive yet. That came in 2004 with the facelift and the launch of the X3, which one might say this is equally important, because, you know, xDrive's everywhere now. It also outsold the X5 with more than 600,000 of them being sold, and, you know, that proved that the X thing actually works. Which brings us to the next X car, the X6. Based on the second generation X5, but it was the world's first sports activity coupe, or a coupe. Not in terms of doors, but a sloping roof. Like, BMW invented this shape. Except they didn't. SsangYong Action, or Action, and Walter White's car, arguably the AMC Eagle, got there first. I guess you could tell by now that BMW doesn't really invent stuff, they just optimize it and popularize it, because after the X6, this body style became extremely popular. And now, this is like kinda the default car shape, right? All thanks to the X6, perhaps. The second gen X5 and X6 were also the first M SUVs, and the first M cars to feature xDrive, and the first M cars with a turbocharged V8, which if you think about it is insane, because before the X5, BMW was basically a sports sedan company, and after the X5, it was basically a luxury performance brand that could sell almost anything as long as it kinda still felt a little bit like a BMW. And that's not actually bad. You know, most people would now be like, no, how the mighty have fallen. But actually, that's a good thing, you know, because they still exist because of that. They still make some amazing cars. And they'd probably go bankrupt if they wouldn't do that. Just like Porsche almost did before the Cayenne. Don't hate the player, you know. Number 7. The E65 7 Series. Highly controversial when it came out. You know, for a lot of people, this marked the so-called beginning of the end for BMW. The downfall. You know, because before this, BMW was this. And then in 2001, they launched this. And then the E60, the E90, and so on. But the thing is, despite the controversial look and poor reception in the beginning, the E65 was a truly revolutionary model. It had a bunch of firsts. For example, iDrive. Yeah, it was the first BMW with iDrive. So a screen in the middle and a rotary knob on the center console in 2001. And just FYI, this layout, so a gauge cluster behind the steering wheel and a big screen right next to it, this didn't really exist before this car. I mean, there were versions of it, but the E65 did it first in like a modern sense. Anyway, iDrive later became the feature of every single BMW until right now, where they finally ditched it after 25 years. Because I guess touchscreens are more intuitive. Love it or hate it, it was revolutionary. It was also the first BMW with a 6-speed automatic, the first BMW with an electronic parking brake. It also had all these new electrical systems, control modules, adaptive systems, all that kind of stuff that was later found in almost every BMW. It was basically a ground-up, brand new car since probably the Neue Klasse in the 60s. Number 8. The i3. Say what you want, but it's really important. It was the first mass-produced BMW electric car launched in 2013. That's just a year after Tesla launched the Model S. Like, electric cars were not really a thing back then yet. It was still something like, you know, maybe they'll become a thing in 20 years, but right now, Not really. You know, sci-fi. I don't know. Well, BMW did it. It's a weird little electric city car with skinny tires, suicide doors, strange materials, but the biggest thing of all was that it was light. 1,200 kilos. That's like an E30. And you know how they achieved that? Carbon fiber reinforced plastic monocoque. Which is insane, because carbon fiber monocoque is hypercar only stuff. You know how many other non-supercar / hypercar cars have this? 0. The i3 was the first and the only one. And yeah, I always thought it was ugly, like this weird little toy car thing. But I must admit that lately, it actually started growing on me. Because, you know, this thing is from 2013. The concept was from 2011. And it still doesn't look old. Like this could pass as a brand new car today. It sort of feels like a preview into the future of BMW, which, you know, they then never really committed to. The i3 and the i8 were the only two cars with this design language and this idea of future, which to me looks like this. Which is sad, but also probably good, because I'm not sure if the world was ready for every BMW to become this spaceship thing back then. And that's the thing with the i3, you know, it was early. It was sort of like BMW's testing ground for what they will eventually do, what they're doing right now. And I bet they learned a lot from it. Number 9, the E39 M5. The first BMW M car with a V8. Now, why is that important? Because, you know, it's the first BMW M car with a V8, bro. Come on, like that's like super freaking important. Anyway, the point is, this was the first M car that kind of moved away from that classic BMW M thing, the high revving motorsport derived 6-cylinder thing, and moved towards something more grrr. It was still sort of high revving, still naturally aspirated, but it was also the first M car that felt a little bit more like a muscle car than a zippy little BMW. It took the M5 to a whole new level. You see, the E34 M5 and the E28 M5 were amazing, but they were also kinda old. You know, 60s suspension design, not a lot of luxury, and the 6-cylinder, while insane in the E28, was a little less insane by the end of the E34. So the M5 needed to move up by a lot. And that's exactly what they did. 4.9 liter S62 V8, 400 horsepower, 500 newton-meters of torque, and at the time it was the fastest sedan in the world, just like the E28 before it. And underneath it was a much more modern car, aluminum suspension components, multi-link rear setup, and it was the first BMW with a sport button, which means sharper throttle, heavier steering, which is completely normal now, but back then that was new. But to me, the E39 M5 is important because it feels like the best, most perfectly executed BMW. Period. Perfect amount of sportiness, perfect amount of luxury, and the E39 in general is just such a solid car. And not a lot of BMWs before or after it had that same kind of feeling. Like every generation does something better and something worse, but you know, E39 kinda has it all. And now, the final one. Probably the most important since the O2 and the Neue Klasse from the 60s. The new Neue Klasse iX3. Or really the whole Neue Klasse lineup, including the new i3 and everything that will follow later. Now, love it or hate it, they are the first cars from BMW's new Neue Klasse era. And you know, that name is not accidental, right? The original Neue Klasse in the 60s basically reset BMW. It gave them a new identity, you know, a new direction, a new kind of car. And now they're doing it again. You know, it's the first proper ground-up BMW in a long time. It sits on a brand new EV platform with 800-volt architecture, around 800 kilometers of WLTP range, blah blah blah, impressive stuff. Anyway, the big challenge now is, can BMW make a big software-heavy electric SUV still feel like a BMW? You know, that's not easy. And And if BMW screws that up, you know, it's over. So it has to work, right? But overall, this is like a really interesting moment right now if you're a BMW fan like me, because, you know, this is like watching the original Neue Klasse cars from the 60s come out, or like, you know, E90, E60 from the 2000s. People hated that too. But we got some amazing cars after that. But yeah, let's just hope they know what they're doing. What do you think about my picks? Is there a BMW I forgot or I should put instead of one? Let me know in the comments. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to like. If you're new to this channel, you can consider subscribing. I do all types of car related videos. This is just one way. I also do like POV stuff and like everything. I don't know. And yeah, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye bye.